Hey there, my name is Matt Wilhelmi, and I'm the owner of Strategic Voyages Business Consultants. I'm also the author of Taboo Business Questions. And today I am joined by Lisa Prusak. She's the CEO of Redstone Business Consulting Group. She and her team work with organizations to identify their North Star and lay a firm foundation for strategic growth through people and process. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning. How are you doing?
I am fantastic, and I'm really excited because today we're talking about one of my most favorite case studies because it's a really, really big company. They have over 500 employees, and they're in the food manufacturing space. I know you've got a little bit of a background in the manufacturing world. Would you mind giving us just a little bit of your background and maybe how this relates?
Yeah, sure. No problem, Matt. Thanks for asking. So I was the former CEO of a specialty chemical manufacturing company here in Houston with global distribution networks worldwide. We produce calibration standards for the oil and gas and petrochemical natural gas industry. So really understand that manufacturing and that distribution, the challenges of that in real life.
Yeah, I would imagine there's probably a lot that goes into that. Not only manufacturing the chemicals, then you got to distribute them. And that's probably very related to the topic today, right? With food manufacturing. And so I wanted to give our viewers just a little bit of background on the business, their issues, how I was introduced to them and brought in. And then you and I are going to unpack some of their issues. We're going to uncover some road mines maybe along the way. We'll see where this conversation goes. And in our second episode, we'll go over some cautionary tales, and you'll have a chance to maybe explain what happens if they don't fix some of these problems and they don't address them the right way. And then in our final episode, that's where we get to, put our lab coats on as the doctors and give some really great strategic advice. So getting back to this case study, it's a food manufacturing company located in the Chicago area. And I was brought in because the owners of the company wanted to take their central distribution channel from Chicago and kind of expand it across the country. And the concern there was, number one, how, kind of the operational side of it. But number two, it sounded like they needed to do a cost analysis. And so that's where I was brought in is kind of the finance guy. And I started to ask some questions. But I'm curious, Lisa, from your perspective and with your background, what would be some of those first questions you'd want to know and get answers to?
Thank you, Matt. So what first comes to mind is that's the expansion piece and if there were any questions in the leadership team's mind about, how are we going to expand? What should we do? These type of questions come to mind from a discovery perspective. I would want to know what was their strategy for expansion and what were the things that they thought about, or were there any difficulties that they may have run into with their plan or their execution of the expansion?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when we're talking about doing a cost analysis, we, kind of start with, well, what are we doing now? And what does it cost to kind of get the product to our current clients? They had clients all over the country that wanted to increase their order size. But what was happening was their shipping to get from their Chicagoland area manufacturing facility to these different parts of the country was becoming a little bit cost prohibitive. And so what we did was we kind of analyzed their distribution channels and we looked at their cost structure. And we started to identify the possibility of having manufacturing plants, little maybe boutique shops that could take on some of these smaller orders to help either manufacture and kind of decentralize the manufacturing. But what we also looked at was the possibility of, having maybe, cold storage or warehouses that could be drop shipped to, and then people could pick up from this distribution channel that way. But we uncovered a number of different issues. It wasn't just about the finances. What I started to realize as I was talking to the owners of this company was that there were some people problems too. I'm sure in your world, being a CEO of a company, the people problems and the people concerns, they come up from time to time, and that might prohibit some of the growth that you want to have. And so my question for you in this particular case, Lisa, is, at what stage, you're brought in to solve a problem, but you notice these other things going on, How do you kind of navigate that to stay focused on your task as the professional that's, being brought in to do one thing without ignoring, kind of some of these other things that are coming up? How would you address those?
So that's a great question. I think that's always a difficulty for anybody in consulting, right? You come in to do one thing, and then you're uncovering some other items. And I think it would be really important to then say, let's have a meeting. Let's unpack some of these things. Let's look at, what are we trying to do? What is and again, this is a small North Star, right? This is like, okay, our goal is for expansion. And so I would want to ask, okay, what does that look like for you? What does that mean for you? Does that mean $10 increase? Does that mean $10 million increase? Where are we now? Right. And what is your goal? And how long do you want it to take to get there? Right. That would be one of the things I would want to find out. Okay. And then if, as I was there, I was realizing that maybe there was a people issue, I would want to ask more questions. What are you experiencing? What are some of the things that are keeping you up at night from a people perspective? Because, when we create a business outcome or a goal and we want to create strategy, we want to, unless we have robots that are doing everything, in between there are people and process, right? So I would want to find out through discovery what's going on right now that's working and what's not working. So I would ask questions and just wait for answers. I wouldn't want to bring in solutions or anything like that. I would really just want to do discovery to the point where we could vet out each one of those problems and issues and maybe put them in buckets, right? And then see if we couldn't have some conversations around that. But that would be my first step.
Yeah. So Lisa, when you're working with an organization and they've got these lofty goals, some people call them BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals, and they use that as a North Star. I'm sure that you also want to help them figure out if their foundation is firm enough to be able to build and chase after this audacious goal. And so, in this particular company, they did have a pretty amazing, clear picture. They wanted to, distribute across the country and have, I think, a dozen or so different, clients that were going to be buying substantially large orders. It was going to increase the revenue by a lot. Their estimations were about 6 times annual revenue. And so for them, it was worth the exercise of figuring out how. But what I noticed was their foundation wasn't ready. They had some people issues, and specifically what was going on was, I worked with them for about a year, and within that year, I noticed, and from talking to some of the team members, that there was a lot of turnover in the middle manager layer of their organization. Not at the VP level, that wasn't like the CFO was leaving or anything like that, or the CMO. And the laborers seemed to really like working there, but their lowest level managers, who had kind of the frontline team working for them, would turn over a lot. And it was something that became kind of an issue that I didn't feel like they would be organizationally ready to kind of grow. And so I'm curious, how you would, what other kind of questions you'd want to ask to clarify and understand really how do we get to the root of some of this, and how do we make sure their foundation is going to be firm for their growth?
So the interesting there is where the turnover was occurring. Okay. And, in middle management and so on. So again, these are discovery questions. How do you choose your middle managers? What type of, career ladders do you have built in the organization? That's the foundation piece, right? So foundation is, how is the organization structured now and for growth? What roles and responsibilities have we identified? What career ladders have we identified? So when I come in, what training am I going to, what do I need to have to come in? What does my experience need to be? What am I going to get trained on? What tools am I going to have? And et cetera. So you want to look at all of that. But for this particular aspect, I would say, have you identified why you have turnover in the middle management layer? Do you have exit interviews that you're doing? Do you have any type of data that suggests to you why these middle managers are leaving, and do you have do you have the data from over time as to how many and who and what did that look like? Is there any pattern that you can notice in the behavior of the organization, right? That we do this and this happens, right? That we can look at. So do we have data? Do we have financial data, and do we have people data that we can look at and say, okay, I can sort of start to identify some other questions that I can ask to start seeing, here are the problems or here are the issues. And then let's have a conversation about what we might want to do to solve those. Is it a foundation issue? Is it a people issue? Is it a training issue? We didn't give them tools and training that they needed? I always like to say to leaders when I'm leading a company, even as well, or even a division, are we equipped? Have we clearly defined roles and responsibilities and accountability and workflow? Do we have our processes in place? Have we looked at the tools that we have? And then are we training our people and supporting them and checking back in with them, right? Are we doing all those things as leaders? If we're not doing all those things, then we have to look at ourselves first. If we have all those things in place, then we look at, do we pick the right people, and are they living into those roles and responsibilities? And so we would want to do a lot of discovery here on that. So there's discovery that we can do on the expansion and what they were thinking about there, right? What does that look like? What were their plans? What was the strategy? What did they try, et cetera, et cetera. And the same thing to be collecting data regarding the turnover, and what does that look like, so that we know what the next questions are to ask, and so that we can put them in buckets and start to organize our thoughts around how to solve some of those problems together, really, but to have really good conversation.
Yeah, I think when you start talking about gathering data, I start to really understand that that's important, right? That's where we're going to see things that people can't necessarily argue with, because it's factual, it's not subjective. And so one of the things I noticed was, of these managers that were leaving, my spidey sense was going off. I just asked, what are we doing when they leave? Are there exit interviews? I asked that question. No, they didn't do exit interviews. Well, and so my next question was, well, if you're not doing an exit interview, who's taking their job? Like, how does it work? I mean, I'm sure you have to have somebody managing these teams. And they said that they would just usually promote, whoever was the most senior person in the team, and they would try and figure it out for a while. And, again, that doesn't sound like a really smooth process. There's not a lot of training. The selection's not really there. It's really not setting everybody up for success. Even if they were the most competent employee, if you don't have that right training in place and giving them the right tools, you're not setting them up for success. You're setting them up for failure.
That's really true. And I want to be clear on this. When you're going through these investigative processes, what's really important is the point of the investigative process is not to point fingers at somebody is at fault. It should be a really good exercise to really do, especially since it's a manufacturing company, so I'm kind of tongue in cheek, right? A root cause analysis, right? If you really think about it, it is a root cause analysis that you're doing. So what happened? A happened. What was the result? B happened. What was the, and you follow this trail and you keep asking why, what, how. And you keep getting down and down and down till you get to the end result, which is really what the root cause was in the first place. And the only way that you're going to get there is if everybody comes into the conversation not feeling like a finger is going to be pointed, blame is going to be assigned, all these things that would make people not want to participate in this process of discovery, because then people are afraid for their own jobs and for their own self, and that's not a really good culture. So if you can build in the capability for people to walk into a room and feel comfortable to have a conversation, to get down to what's really happening, and to be able to have these really good discovery calls and to share ideas and data, then it really allows us to really get at what's really going on so that we can really solve it with them, not for them, with them. That's important also.
That's a really key term. I'm sure you want to solve those problems with them. And what I noticed in the different meetings were that some of the leaders were very, very hesitant to contribute during the meeting. I think it was either the owner or perhaps the owner's family that was there. He had 2 sons that were kind of running the company with him. That dynamic was so interesting. The tension in some of these rooms was palpable. It was really awkward. And I don't normally get nervous, but I was nervous for the people that weren't saying anything. And so, yeah, it just became not a really positive environment in some of their meetings. So I kind of realized that there might be more issues here than meets the eye. But I do want to kind of summarize where we're at, because I think that we've unpacked quite a bit of this case study, Lisa, and I really appreciate your expertise here in helping me with this. And so we'll get into some cautionary tales in our next episode. In the one after that, we'll talk about some of the solutions. But for right now, I just want to recap. We've got this food manufacturing company. They've got over 500 employees. They're trying to expand their business. They see this North Star. They see this big goal that they want to accomplish as really, really significant annual revenue growth, 6 times annual revenue. I'm going to put that down as their North Star, to use one of your terms. But again, borrowing one of your terms, I don't think their foundation was really that firm. And so, we kind of summarized 3 issues, right? They want to expand, but they're not really quite sure how. They have some turnover that they really need to kind of figure out why and how that's going to affect things. And then maybe they've got some process problems and some people problems. Is that going to have more roots there that maybe go into the training and development areas, perhaps? And so I'm really looking forward to continuing to unpack this case study and hear some of your cautionary tales in the next episode.